Good morning, good morning, beautiful people. Good afternoon, good evening. No matter what time it is, just know this is the day that the Lord has made, and I will rejoice and be glad in it. As always, God is good, and He is good all the time. All right, forgive me. I fell off a little bit from posting. I was posting videos, but not as often. I am working on some videos in the editing process, so to speak. They're pretty lengthy. I do all my work by myself. That's no excuse. I just want to let you know that I'm by myself, so it's not like I have a hired team. But I'm gonna get to it. I'm finishing renovations in my house. Mother freaking trying to squeeze time in to still go and go to the gym so I could stay in shape. It's a lot. And then I want to go back to school. I want to get my PhD and go and get my JD so I could be a lawyer. And I got a lot of work to do. So I fell off a little bit. My goal is to post a video regularly every week at minimum. I haven't been so good with that, but at least one every week at minimum. I might surprise you with two or more, but that's the plan. All right, so let's get into it. Today's video, we're talking about the Chinese Exclusion Act. Now, I came across the knowledge of this during my master's program, right? And so for my master's thesis, or at that time, we referred to it as a capstone. So for my capstone or master's thesis, I decided to do my paper on immigration because at the time when I started there, it was like late 2018 going into 2019 type of thing. When I had started, immigration has always been a big bulk of American, history, what's going on in the world and all that jazz. But to me, it's like it was an unknown area. Like I know of the existing prejudices that surrounds immigration and all this other stuff, but I didn't know anything about it except in the sense that you're not from here. If you don't have documentation, you're considered illegal. But I didn't like that because my thought process is like this land doesn't specifically belong to nobody. Like the US does not specifically belong to Native Americans. Like yes, they may be indigenous to this land for some thousands of years. However, it don't belong to nobody. Now how it was motherfucking colonized and conquered, oh yeah, we could have done without that. You know what I'm saying? Like niggas could have motherfucking shared the land without all that massacring, millions of people, basically. However, this land don't belong to nobody. And it's a person cannot reside anywhere illegally. You know what I'm saying? Like it doesn't matter where you move. If I move to motherfucking Sweden, you can't be you here illegally. How? My existence isn't illegal. It can't be. I'm human. You can't control, just like you can't control when a tree decides to want to timber and fall into your motherfucking property. You cannot control humans' behavior. Your autonomy doesn't go outside of you. So that was my mindset. But I wanted to get more information, especially because my wife is Mexican. She's first generation born in the U.S. and her parents were immigrants. You know what I'm saying? And they're people who have documentation. And when I would hear the stories of what her mother went through trying to raise her kids, without a man, and then in a country that views her as this illegal person. And when I started to learn, it made me think like, there's more to this than I know. So I decided to research it, and I researched it in May. My mind has been open. And one day I hope to go through my motherfucking research paper with you. It is posted out. Share the link if anyone of y'all want to motherfucking read it on your own time. There is some errors. It was my motherfucking first, legit research paper. But yeah, the most I could do is I was looking for videos that kind of like tailor certain aspects of my paper. And so since the Chinese Immigration Act is pretty much what started the legislation in the United States regarding immigration, I figured, why not start with this, Especially because a lot of people wonder, there's a lot of like ignorance in the world, especially in the US, right, about our history. And even though people like to discredit slaves, you got those group of people that overly credit slaves, right? They think that slaves created every single thing. And here's the thing. Slaves contributed a lot to the United States of America, but you have to take into consideration when slavery was in its, in its prime, in its beginning, and towards its end, it is what we would call colonial America. It was only 13 colonies, you know what I'm saying? And then you didn't really have the West Coast like that. That was considered a part of the U.S. So the bulk of the East Coast, hell yeah, that was built off the strengths of motherfucking African Americans. The East Coast, however, they ain't really got too much to do with us. That got to do with the Asian people, you know what I'm saying? And the motherfucking Latinos, Mexicans, Native Mexicans. I mean, most people like to tell Mexicans, go back to your country, overlooking the fact that a lot of these people are native born here. Like, they're generation born in Arizona, in California, you know what I'm saying, in Texas, in motherfucking New Mexico. A lot of times these people don't even be like Mexican or Latino per se. They consider themselves Native American. They're indigenous people, but they get motherfucking labeled because of ignorance. You know what I'm saying? So there's this. I just want to help y'all clear your minds, right? Educate y'all, because there's a lot of ignorance floating around. But let's get into it because I've been went on for a good minute.
After 12 years living in California, Chinese citizen Che Ping was ready for a visit home. He procured the necessary documents for his departure and return journey and set sail for China, where he spent the next year reconnecting with friends and family. But when he returned to San Francisco on October 8, 1888, Ping and his fellow immigrant passengers were forbidden to disembark. Just days earlier, President Grover Cleveland had signed the Scott Act, which invalidated the legal documents allowing their re-entry to the United States. This policy threatened to separate families and deprive Chinese immigrants of their homes and livelihoods. Ping challenged the ruling, beginning a legal battle for the rights of thousands of Chinese immigrants. But his case inspired an even more controversial policy that continues to impact immigrants around the globe. Discrimination against Chinese immigrants had begun decades earlier, when the California gold rush created a massive demand for labor. Many built railroads and worked in the mines, while others operated laundries, restaurants, and general stores. The 1868 Burlingame Treaty even granted China favored trading status with the US and allowed unrestricted migration between the two countries. But as large numbers of Chinese immigrants found success, American workers began to see them as a threat.
This ain't no new phenomenon. This is the same thing that they do with Mexicans currently and other Latinos.
Politicians and labor leaders denounced them for driving down wages, and violence against Chinese individuals became increasingly common. This anti-Chinese sentiment soon found its way into California's courts. In 1854, following...
This is why I don't agree with the current, like, anti-hate crime thing with Asian people. Especially because they want to target black people. First off, historically, the West Coast don't even have as many black people as the East Coast has. And when you look at the West Coast has a large Latino population compared to the East Coast. So the fact that these niggas out here want to make the motherfucking hate crime, thing with Asian folks, and they want to target black people, I think it's wild. First off, you got to look at the location. Where the freak do Asian people live? They tend to live in very diverse areas, which tend to be cities, which tend to have large black populations. However, when you look at the East Coast or the West Coast, because the black population is so tiny, nigga, 9 times out of 10, Asian people over there are getting terrorized by Latinos and white people because ain't that many black people over here. Over here, it's a little different. But at the end of the day, the amount of Asian people that are sustaining motherfucking hate crimes by black people is nowhere near the amount of motherfucking Asian people sustaining hate crimes inflicted upon them by white people. I mean, data alone, motherfucking addresses that. So it's not right. It's bull.
A murder trial where a white man was convicted of murdering a Chinese man, the California Supreme Court overturned the conviction, holding that Chinese eyewitness testimony was inadmissible. The court declared that Chinese citizens could not testify against white defendants, citing similar precedents forbidding testimony by black and Native American individuals. This decision effectively legalized violence against California's Chinese population, inspiring mob attacks and campaigns for segregation. Before long, anti-Chinese sentiment reached the federal level. In 1882, Congress passed the Chinese Exclusion Act, the first federal law that restricted immigration based explicitly on nationality. In practice, the act banned entry to all ethnically Chinese immigrants besides diplomats and prohibited existing immigrants from obtaining citizenship. It also meant Chinese individuals couldn't leave the United States and return without first applying for a certificate of re-entry. This policy remained in place until October 1st, 1888, when the Scott Act prohibited re-entry altogether, stranding Che Chan-ping and thousands of other Chinese immigrants. In court, Ping argued he had followed the proper protocol obtaining his re-entry certificate, and the government had not honored his legally issued document. This argument was strong enough to send his case all the way to the Supreme Court, but the justices ruled against Ping, invalidating thousands of legal re-entry certificates in one fell swoop. The decision led to Ping's deportation and left up to 20,000 Chinese immigrants unable to return to the...
The crazy thing about it is that this man had the documentation to show that he was a documented citizen, a documented immigrant, and yet they basically null and void the legal documentations. If y'all have ever seen, what is it, Handmaiden, the TV show, these people had papers and they were trying to leave the U.S. as the U.S. was turning to become handmaiden. And these people invalidated their documents. And it's crazy how people think, oh, these things will never happen to me. I'm good. I'm legal. I'm documented. All this other junk. I'm a citizen. And the crazy thing about it, all of that can change and disappear just from the stroke of a pen. Type of something in the legislation. Literally.
U.S. But arguably even more important than the court's racist ruling was the logic they used to support it. Traditionally, the Supreme Court is considered a check on the other two branches of American government, offering judgment on policies passed by Congress and the President. In this case, however, the court stated they had no power to pass judgment on the Scott Act, since Congress had declared the immigration policy a matter of national security.
Another thing when it comes to these judges, right, as he mentioned, that there's supposed to be a checks and balance between the three governing bodies, the legislative, executive, and judicial branch. However, I've learned after experiencing some terrible interactions with a judge where my constitutional rights were violated, and not just one, several of them, but I've learned that even if I try to get some kind of like retribution from the harm that was caused upon me, right? Judges, likewise, as Congress, they're protected by what is called absolute immunity, which basically states that they cannot be held civilly liable for something that they do while acting in their position of power, whether if they're sitting on the bench, as a judge, or they're within their duties as a legislator. They're prevented, from legal liability. And so you can't sue them. And then you're forced to go through these committees to expect some type of justice, retribution. But the crazy part about it is that nothing ever gets done. So for example, with the judges, right? You can't sue them, but you can file a complaint with the Judicial Commission, right? And when you file a complaint with them, you expect that they will act on whatever it is. But the thing is that majority of the time, no matter how severe your situation is, they rarely ever find grounds of misconduct for these judges. I mean, there's ample amount of study that shows these people researched, they looked into all of the complaints that were made, how many of these complaints something actually was done, and how many was there was nothing done. And over 90% of these complaints, there's no misconduct found. It's less than 5% of these complaints, it's less than 3% actually, that these complaints are actually found credible, where they find misconduct. And how do you expect a commission that's full of a bunch of judges to check judges? That's like having police check police. We see when police are expected to police their own, when they cause harm, constitutional harm unto citizens, majority of the time nothing is ever done. Nothing comes from it. The same thing that goes with judges. So it's crazy that judges can make these decisions, you know what I'm saying, and there's no repercussion. Me personally, I feel that y'all, us as citizens, we should get more on board, get in tune with this stuff, man, because we have the power. We outnumber the government. We outnumber every governmental actor. The little people do. That's why they keep us, divided amongst each other. They use the Beacon's Rebellion tactic called divide and conquer. As long as they keep us quarreling amongst each other, we're too busy and we'll never come together to come after those who oppress us all. We all are oppressed. Our oppression may not be identical, but it damn near is similar.
This decision set a unique precedent. Unless Ping's case was overturned, congressional and executive branches could claim national security concerns to pass whatever immigration laws they wanted.
And the crazy thing about it, too, is that a lot of native-born people think that immigration issues doesn't apply to them, when the fact of the matter is the United States of America was founded by immigrants. You had niggas coming from places outside of native lands, right? Native U.S. They came here and motherfucking colonized. Then they brought some other freaking Africans here and enslaved them. There were some Africans here, but they brought a good bit of them, here and enslaved them. And it's crazy because people's like, well, I don't care because generations and generations, my family has been born here. Really? Tell that to the indigenous people that have lived here for thousands and millions of years. You know what I'm saying? They don't give a damn about none of that. They sit here and make laws and want to pick and choose who get to come in and be like, we're going to ostracize you because you're an immigrant. Whole time, their families are immigrants. If you know anything about the Italian population, they're called WAPs, without papers, because these niggas came through Ellis Island. Ain't had no legal documentation. But they consider themselves generations and generations and generations are born here. They're legal. Well, your ancestors weren't. So technically, if you go based on those clauses, everything that proceeds from the first action is tainted. So if your ancestors weren't legal, me personally, I feel like you ain't legal now. But there's no such thing as legal and illegal. And that's why I think it's stupid that these people, they can fathom the idea for other people, but when it comes to looking through those lenses and viewing themselves through them lens, niggas don't want to do it, man.
Throughout the 20th century, xenophobic government officials used this power to freely discriminate against immigrant groups.
This legislation, people fail to realize that the Chinese Immigration Act of 1882 doesn't just ostracize Asian people, but it's immigrants in general. And even slaves were considered immigrants and the descendants of slaves. So, like I said, it's just a matter of a push of a pen, typing it up, some legislation, and now all of a sudden, retroactively, every descendant from a slave is now considered an illegal, undocumented immigrant. Be mindful of what oppression you allow others to endure, because it can happen to you.
1917 Asiatic Barred Zone Act prohibited the entry of all South Asians, and a series of immigration acts in the 1920s expanded restrictions throughout Asia, Eastern Europe, and Southern Europe. Many of these restrictions were lifted after World War II, and the Chinese Exclusion Act itself was finally repealed in 1943, over 60 years after it was enacted. But the US government continues to use this precedent to deploy sudden and sweeping immigration policies targeting journalists and dissidents, as well as ethnic groups. Little is known about what became of Che Chan-ping following his deportation, but the injustices visited upon him and thousands of other Chinese Americans continue to impact immigrant rights and liberties.
Well, I hope you learned something from this and you're able to, engage in conversation with your family, and hopefully it changed your mindset when it comes to motherfucking immigrants, because a lot of our thoughts, our opinions, our interpretations of it, it's tainted. It's tainted with misinformation and ignorance and such. And at the end of the day, all it takes is just the stroke of a pen, the push of a button to type up some legislation. And next thing you know, even the very people that think this will never happen to me, it ends up happening to you. Peace. If you want people to think otherwise of you more positively, then give them more positive experiences.